Hello and welcome, Divine Warrior. You didn't just survive what was meant to destroy you. You danced through it like it barely touched your aura. And if you're here right now, reading this, it's not by accident. Something sacred pulled you in. A force beyond logic. A vibration only the anointed ones can feel. Let me ask you, have you ever walked away from something that should have crushed you, only to look back later and realize, that was a direct hit, and I didn't even bleed? That's not normal. That's not luck. That's God's fingerprint on your life. That's divine immunity wrapped around your calling. Some folks dodge drama. Some sidestep bad luck. But you, chosen one, you just glided past a full-on spiritual assassination attempt with your peace intact and your glow unshaken. You were targeted, marked, spiritually profiled for destruction, but it didn't land. Because heaven didn't authorize your collapse. That's why you need to comment 777 right now, if you know deep down that what tried to break you just made you sharper. And to every beautiful soul sowing into this space through super thanks, thank you from the deepest part of this mission. Your support isn't just noticed, it's anointed. And here's the part no one saw coming. The same bullet they prayed would silence you. It ended up shattering their illusion instead. That's what happens when divine favor makes you untouchable. That's what happens when you're not just chosen, you're protected. So stay close, because what you're about to hear next will unlock the hidden truth behind your survival. We're diving into exactly what you just dodged, how you did it without breaking, and why your presence alone is blowing the cover off every secret plot they tried to bury. You're not just here. You're here on purpose. Let's begin. God's chosen ones, you're a walking miracle. Just dodged a bullet like it was nothing. You didn't just dodge a bullet. You became the front line in a war your soul never signed up for. But the moment your spirit entered the battlefield, the entire narrative shifted. Because what struck you, what nearly unraveled your peace and splintered your world, was never meant for you in the first place. You were standing in a storm summoned by someone else, in a space tainted by decisions you never made, absorbing the impact of spiritual crossfire that was centuries in the making. Have you ever wondered why the fire found you, even when you didn't light the match? This is the part they don't see when they look at you. They see strength, resilience, maybe even grace. But they don't see the invisible weight you carried that didn't even belong to you. How much pain have you carried in silence, simply because your spirit was strong enough to hold what others refused to face? You weren't attacked for your mistakes. You were attacked for your mantle, for the role you were chosen to play in a divine expose. You were the decoy, but not a victim. You were the vessel through which ancient agreements, silent generational sicknesses, and cloaked spiritual pacts were forced into the light. Just like Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, not because he had done wrong, but because the family bloodline was infected with jealousy, secrecy, and generational dysfunction. Genesis 37. It wasn't Joseph they hated. It was the divine dream God placed in him. That dream exposed what had been festering in silence for years. Does it now make sense why your presence stirred reactions you couldn't explain? You are walking in the same anointing now. The spiritual realm didn't place you in that storm to break you. It placed you there because only you could stand without bowing, endure without cursing, and survive without losing your soul. And survive you did. What nearly crushed you wasn't a moment, it was a legacy being confronted, like a centuries-old dam finally bursting, not because you cracked it, but because your presence exposed the hidden leaks. The betrayal you felt wasn't fresh, it was ancestral. The heartbreak that shook you didn't originate with you. It echoed through the choices of those who came before, passed down like an unspoken inheritance. until it found someone brave enough to break the cycle. Have you realized yet that the pain you endured wasn't punishment, but purification? That someone was you. You took the hit that was supposed to destroy someone else, but instead you transformed it into clarity, just like Job, who absorbed wave after wave of divine permissioned attack, not because of sin, but because of trust. Have you considered my servant Job? Job 1:8. God knew Job could carry what others couldn't, just as heaven knew you would uncover truth where others would only have inherited silence. What if your survival wasn't about strength, but about divine strategy? What if the storm wasn't sent to defeat you, but to reveal you? A friend of mine, Leona, a retired army chaplain, once told me, "The enemy always miscalculates when they shoot at someone who's already been forged in fire." She knew what it meant to carry spiritual weight on the battlefield. You do too. Think of a redwood tree, towering, ancient, immovable. But what most don't know is that its strength lies in its roots, intertwined underground with an entire network of trees. When one is attacked, the others send nourishment, signals, and strength. That's what happened to you. You were attacked not for your height, but for the depth of your unseen roots, and heaven rallied for you, even when no one around you did. Have you ever felt unseen, not knowing heaven was already orchestrating your backup? There was a young woman named Callista, a second-grade teacher, soft-spoken, always helping others. She had no idea her entire school was caught in a web of corruption, favoritism, and spiritual manipulation from leadership. But when the spiritual storm came, it found her. Emails were leaked. Her name was dragged through gossip. But one by one, everything hidden was exposed because she chose to stand in truth. She didn't crumble. She revealed. That's what you've done. And now the masks have slipped. The illusions have shattered. The generational chains are cracking under the weight of your survival. What was meant to confuse you has clarified everything. What was meant to isolate you has crowned you. And what was meant to silence you has actually validated your voice. Isn't it strange how your silence became the loudest sound in the room? You didn't just walk through warfare. You rerouted a centuries-old bullet and forced it to reveal its source. And in doing so, you became the evidence. Not just that God protects his own, but that spiritual weapons are powerless against divine assignments. Oprah Winfrey once shared how, after surviving abuse, racism, and betrayal in her early career, a certain television producer tried to blacklist her, labeling her unfit for TV. But what was meant to silence her only amplified her purpose. Like Joseph, she rose in spite of betrayal, not because she fought back, but because favor fought for her. Meanwhile, that same producer, whose name once carried weight, faded into obscurity, his power evaporating under the spotlight he once used as a weapon. As Romans 8:31 reminds us, if God is for us, who can be against us? And Isaiah 43:2 declares, when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. You're not just a survivor. You're the truth that can no longer be buried. You were never meant to survive what you survived, not according to the scripts written in silence behind closed doors. You were scheduled to self-destruct, down to the exact moment, the final straw, the breaking thought. It was designed like a blueprint of collapse, and it was personal. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your existence posed a threat to a system that depended on your silence, your smallness, your surrender. Have you ever stopped to wonder why your very presence seemed so dangerous to them? Why your light made them so uncomfortable, even when you said nothing? From the outside, it looked like emotional exhaustion, maybe stress, maybe burnout. But in the spiritual realm, it was precision warfare. Certain people around you, the ones who claimed to care, were quietly invested in your downfall. Not always with words, sometimes just with passivity, subtle sabotage, and a silence that screamed louder than betrayal. They fed your insecurities like slow poison, watched you question your worth, played with your fears, then backed away just enough to pretend innocence. And beneath it all, darker forces moved, watching, measuring, calculating. They didn't just study your pain, they studied your patterns. And in those moments of confusion, did you ever ask yourself, am I imagining this, or is something real trying to break me from the inside out? It felt like everything was collapsing at once, didn't it? Like your body was shutting down, your mind looping through the same ache, your emotions becoming numb. You were moments away from total shutdown, mentally, spiritually, and physically. That's how precise the trap was. How could anyone have known just how close you were to disappearing? But what no one anticipated, what not even you could fully understand, was what happened in that moment of almost collapse. Your soul did something sacred. God intervened. At the exact second the system predicted your breakdown, heaven rewired the entire mechanism. The spiritual trigger they hoped would shatter you became the very point where your soul reactivated. The bomb didn't just fail, it transformed into a resurrection code, and instead of crumbling, you rebooted. Your grief flipped into growth. Your despair sharpened into discernment. The very moment they thought would destroy you became the platform for your elevation. Isn't it strange how God often chooses the final second, the last breath, the cliff edge, to perform his most radical rewiring? This is what Paul meant when he wrote, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, struck down, but not destroyed." 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. That's not poetry. That's prophecy fulfilled in your life. You were meant to be one of the many who fold, but instead, you became the few who rise. Let me tell you about Robert Downey Jr., one of Hollywood's brightest talents who nearly lost it all. Fame came early, but so did addiction, arrests, and public collapse. He was labeled beyond saving, written off as a cautionary tale. At his lowest, a powerful studio executive even told producers, "Don't waste a cent on him, he'll ruin your film and vanish." Those words became chains in the minds of many. But in one of his darkest nights, after another stint in jail, something sacred began to stir. Downey later shared how, in that silent moment of collapse, he felt an unmistakable shift, a divine nudge that said, "You're not done yet." He embraced help, sought healing, and rebuilt his life brick by brick. Today, he's not just Iron Man, he's a walking testimony that favor can resurrect what the world tries to bury. He was supposed to self-destruct. Instead, he became a sanctuary. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Psalm 34, verse 19. Have you considered that your scars might not be evidence of defeat, but architecture for someone else's healing? That what was meant to mark you for death might be the very sign someone else needs to believe in life again. You've done the same. In a world that expected your ruin, you rose like something unexplainable, like rain falling upwards, like a flower blooming in concrete. From the outside, it looked like nothing changed. But inside, God rerouted every wire. They were waiting for you to implode, and now they have no idea how you've become stronger, more focused, more clear than ever before. And maybe, just maybe, the miracle wasn't in your comeback, but in how quiet, unshakable, and undetectable your transformation really was. And still they whisper, still they wonder, how did you survive that? But what they fail to understand is that your existence isn't random. Your survival isn't just grace, it's strategy. Divine, deliberate, and untouchable. I'll never forget the story of Ava, a young pianist who grew up in a strict home where love was conditional, Praise was rare, and shame was currency. She had panic attacks before recitals, night terrors she never told anyone about, but something kept her playing. Years later, she learned her gift wasn't just talent, it was warfare. Her music began to heal others, depressed teens, grieving widows, lonely strangers. The very thing they hoped would break her spirit became the key God used to heal hundreds. That's you. You are someone's key. Could it be that your very gift, the one they dismissed, minimized, or tried to bury, is the exact tool God will use to rebuild broken hearts? Think of the tectonic plates under the ocean. They're constantly shifting, sometimes violently, but those shifts create new continents. That's what happened inside of you. Your nervous breakdown was really a spiritual realignment. They built a trap expecting you to fall through it, but instead you walked over it and built something sacred. Now, every time you speak truth, every time you love, laugh, heal, or simply breathe with peace, they lose ground. Because your existence is no longer wired for destruction, it's designed for destiny. Your life became the very proof that spiritual systems built to collapse the chosen can't override God's plans. And do you feel it? That quiet power in simply continuing to exist when they bet on your disappearance? You were never meant to detonate. You were meant to disrupt. And that disruption is happening every time you choose to live with clarity, with power, and with joy. Stay grounded. You're not just the survivor of a close call. You're the evidence that divine rewiring is real and unstoppable. What you escaped was never just danger. It was a soul trap, custom built in silence, dressed in false peace, and engineered with one purpose: to erase your divine identity. It wasn't a bullet you dodged. It was an invisible scheme, spiritual in nature, masked as a difficult season, a toxic relationship, a breakdown you couldn't explain. But make no mistake, it was warfare. It was meant to cut you off from the truth of who you are, not by force, but by erosion. Slowly, quietly, thoroughly. Have you ever found yourself doubting your own memories, second-guessing your worth, feeling like your voice no longer belonged to you? That wasn't confusion. That was targeted dismantling. The goal was never your death, it was your disconnection. Because if the enemy can't kill your body, he will always aim for your knowing, that deep, ancient part of you that remembers your calling, your spiritual assignment, your origin. Just as Jesus was led into the wilderness and tempted, not with violence, but with distortion. If you are the Son of God, Matthew 4:3, that was the strategy. Questioning identity, testing memory, suggesting he prove what he already knew. That same strategy was used on you. The attacks were designed to hijack your clarity, fog your vision, blur your boundaries, and convince you that confusion was your new normal. And yet somehow, even as your mind spun and your emotions spiraled, something in you stayed anchored. It wasn't loud, it wasn't proud, it was quiet defiance in the spirit, a whisper inside that refused to bow. You didn't even have the words for it, but you remembered. You remembered something they couldn't program out of you, your essence. Your soul didn't just survive, it resisted. I'll never forget hearing about Lucia, a graphic designer from Lisbon. She spent 2 years in a relationship that slowly dismantled her identity. The gaslighting was so refined that she began to believe she was incapable, unlovable, unwanted. But one night, while working late on a project, she opened an old journal. Inside was a line she'd written as a teenager: "God will use my hands to speak when I feel voiceless." That line undid something. She left the next morning. 3 years later, her artwork hangs in a trauma recovery center. She told me, "I thought I was losing my mind. Turns out I was losing their version of me." That's what you've gone through. And more. You walked through spiritual interference so subtle that even the people around you couldn't see it. And some of them, They were part of it, unknowingly echoing the very energy that was trying to trap you. That's why your spirit felt caged, why your joy felt artificial, why even your reflections started to look unfamiliar. You weren't depressed, you were under siege. But the moment the trap failed, the power shifted. You didn't just survive, you woke up. You started to see the patterns. You recognized how energy was being siphoned. You saw the smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the conversations that drained instead of restored, the environments that bent your spirit into something smaller, and you walked away. Like Moses returning from the mountain, glowing with an awareness the people around him could not process. Exodus 34:29. That's you now. Your glow unsettles, your clarity exposes. Your presence makes spirits tremble that once celebrated your confusion. And what they never expected was for you to come out of it stronger than you went in. Realer, unshaken, whole. There's a young man named Theo. He was once groomed into silence, told his sensitivity was weakness, his dreams were unrealistic, and his voice too loud for the world to accept. But after nearly losing himself in a corporate machine designed to extract his creativity while muting his spirit, he took a 3-week sabbatical to a coastal retreat in Italy. No social media, no noise. There in stillness, he wept for days, not out of sadness, but because he remembered who he was. Today, he leads a creative fellowship for disenfranchised youth, restoring voices lost to systems that only wanted performance, not purpose. The same is true for you. The trap was never built to kill you quickly. It was designed to confuse you until you surrendered your identity by default, to make you feel like safety meant shrinking. That survival required silence. That peace was only found in obedience to other people's projections. But you broke the spell. You now carry a level of spiritual awareness that cannot be manufactured. Your clarity is rare, your sense of purpose is forged, and your refusal to go back, that's your new weapon. Think of a falcon once caged. When released, it doesn't just fly, it remembers how. That's what you did. You remembered how to be whole. You remembered how to be true. You remembered how to be you. And now, your very presence testifies against every lie that was spoken over you. You walk with a truth that can't be faked, a light that can't be dimmed, and an authority born not of ego, but of endurance. You didn't just escape, you exposed, and you're never going back. You're not just a miracle walking among mortals, you are living proof that even hell has loopholes. You shouldn't be here, not by the standards of logic, not by the laws of generational repetition. You weren't supposed to make it out. According to everything stacked against you, statistically, spiritually, emotionally, you were meant to collapse. You were groomed for dysfunction, coded for failure, and positioned inside a bloodline that had never known true breakthrough. Have you ever paused and truly considered the odds? The emotional trauma that started before you had language for it? The patterns in your family that made survival feel like rebellion? The shame, the silence, the whispered secrets passed down like heirlooms. And still, you didn't just endure, you escaped. Not through force, not through reason, but through something holy and unspeakable. A crack in the system, a spiritual loophole written into your destiny before you even took your first breath. Just like Moses, born into a genocidal decree, raised in Pharaoh's palace, yet chosen to lead the very people he wasn't supposed to know. I will be with you, God told him. Exodus 3:12. Not you'll be strong, not you'll figure it out. I will be with you. That same presence walked you through the fire others never came out of. People saw what you endured. They watched you go through betrayal that should have broken your voice, abuse that should have distorted your trust, grief that should have locked you in a cycle of numbness. But when they looked again, you weren't just breathing, you were blooming. And that confuses them, because they watched others go through far less, yet never recover. But you You rose from places that have graves already dug for others. How? But now, this is what the Lord says, He who created you, Jacob, He who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1. Even Pharaoh, who once held baby Moses under his roof, whose decree was meant to erase him, ended up face to face with the power of the very God he tried to silence. Pharaoh wasn't just an oppressor, he was the symbol of every system that believes power comes from control. And yet, in the end, it was the presence of God, not political might, that parted seas and broke chains. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. Isaiah 54:17. So how did you survive? You didn't just endure, you were carried. You didn't just rise, you were called. And the same Spirit that spoke from burning bushes and turned staffs into signs is the same Spirit that whispered over your bones when others thought you were done. Live. Because something sacred pulled you through the back door of disaster. While the world was watching for your downfall, heaven slipped you through the crack they didn't see coming. You were snatched, not saved politely, like Lot from Sodom, like Daniel from the lion's den, like Peter walking out of a locked prison with chains falling off before he could process what was happening. Acts 12:6-10. And I must tell you about Seraphina, a Haitian midwife who grew up in a family steeped in ancestral ritual. She never wanted to follow the path set before her, but the spiritual forces around her made resistance feel impossible. One night, after being tormented for weeks with visions and despair, she dropped to her knees and screamed into the night. Not with words, but from a depth of soul only God could hear. The next morning she awoke with peace so unnatural it frightened her. Every time she's asked how she was delivered, she smiles and says, "I think God glitched the code." She now runs a small birthing center where she prays over every child born, covering them in the same grace that saved her. That's what happened to you. You didn't walk out by willpower. You didn't calculate an exit. You were extracted by divine override. You weren't meant to escape the system. They didn't program an exit for you. But divinity doesn't play by their rules. When God chooses to interrupt, no contract in hell can hold. No curse can persist. No spell can land. Even nature echoes this mystery. Picture a salmon swimming upstream, against force, against odds, against natural logic. Why does it keep going? Because something ancient is calling it home. That's what pulled you. You weren't running from something. You were magnetized by the truth you were born for. And now that you're free, the very atmosphere shifts when you enter a room. You're not just healed, you're activated. You carry the energy of someone who has crossed over, who's been to the edge of madness, the brink of loss, and the pit of spiritual exhaustion, yet returned with fire in your eyes and thunder in your footsteps. People sense it, even if they can't name it. Some draw near because they feel safe. Others retreat because your presence exposes the very chains they still wear. But all of them know there's something about you that doesn't make sense. That's because you're not just walking in recovery. You are the contradiction, the breach in a system that was supposed to be airtight, the error message in the enemy's blueprint, the reminder that God still intervenes. You are not here by chance. You're here as a declaration that contracts made in darkness can be cancelled, that soul prisons can be unlocked without a key, that patterns can be broken by one chosen vessel saying, "No more." You, beloved, are the living loophole hell never planned for, and that's exactly why they can't figure you out. You're not just a survivor, you're a sacred disruption. You're proof that the divine still rewrites stories. Your survival did more than shock people. It embarrassed entire bloodlines who were counting on your collapse. This wasn't just about you failing. Your fall was supposed to prove that no one escapes, that no one in your family rises, that no one dares to speak the truth. You were meant to carry the weight and die quietly under it, just like the ones before you. But you didn't break. You exposed. They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Jeremiah 1:19. Have you ever felt like your very existence was a contradiction to everything you were born into? Like your spirit was too awake to keep pretending? What you survived didn't just free you, it sent shockwaves through both realms. You shamed the darkness that claimed your lineage, the dysfunction that wore your family name like armor. You were never meant to notice it, but you saw it all. You spoke. You stopped pretending. And that choice broke centuries of silence. Like Jeremiah, who was set apart before birth, Jeremiah 1:5, you were marked for disruption. The moment you chose truth over tradition, healing over hiding, you declared spiritual war. And war doesn't go unnoticed. Let me tell you about Tyler Perry. Raised in poverty and abused as a child, he was told by teachers and church leaders alike that he was too emotional, too ambitious, too dramatic. One pastor even publicly told him he'd never be used by God in that way. But Perry refused to bow. He wrote in secret, healed in silence, and poured truth into every stage play he created. Now, he's a billionaire, a producer, and an owner of one of the largest studios in the world, built on land that once hosted Confederate armies. His survival wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. And the man who laughed in that church pew, who told Tyler he'd never speak for God, he watches in silence now as Perry's voice echoes through millions. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118, verse 22. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. And now you carry a clarity that rattles rooms. The people who once mocked your pain now avoid your eyes, not because you changed, but because you see them now. Has your vision ever made people shift in their seats? Have you noticed how your peace disturbs what used to control you? Even nature testifies, like the eagle born on cliff edges. When it flies, it doesn't just move, it separates itself from limitation. So did you. You walked away from a name without walking away from your soul. And that makes you dangerous to every lie that hoped you'd stay small. You're not just healed, you're revealed. The altar they built to silence you became your platform. The pain they hoped would bury you became your message. And the truth they feared you'd carry to your grave, you carried it straight into the light. You are the one bloodlines never expect. The pattern breaker, the truth teller, the returned one. You didn't just survive, you rose, and your rising is their reckoning. You've probably wondered, why does it feel like I'm always under fire, even when I'm just trying to exist? Why does peace come with a shadow, and rest feel like a luxury you have to fight for? Here's the truth. Most won't say out loud, it's not because you're easy to defeat, it's because you're impossible to replace. You carry something so distinct, so divinely coded, that every attack against you has really been an attempt to duplicate and erase you at the same time, but they failed. Because what God imprinted in your spirit can't be forged, copied, or passed on. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Jeremiah 1:5. Have you ever considered that the warfare isn't proof of weakness, but of necessity? You weren't attacked to silence your voice. You were attacked to prevent the delivery of what you carry, your vision, your clarity, your resonance. Because once you speak, something hidden shatters. Once you enter a room, falsehood starts to squirm. It's not you they fear, it's what awakens because of you. Even Jesus, after fasting 40 days in the wilderness, was attacked right before his public assignment began. Why? Because purpose, when revealed, threatens systems. Matthew 4. Your story echoes the same rhythm. The closer you get to clarity, the more chaos tries to cloud your path. I once met a man named Julian, an architect in Cape Town, who was quietly designing shelters for abused women, funded by his own paycheck. When local developers discovered what he was doing, they tried to smear him, steal his plans, even freeze his accounts. Why? Because his blueprints weren't just buildings, they were interruptions to systems of power. They didn't want me gone, he told me. They wanted me tired. You know that feeling well, don't you? Because that's always been the real tactic. Not quick destruction, but slow exhaustion. Drain your joy, make you doubt your worth, whisper lies until you self-sabotage. But even when you were running on fumes, when friends misunderstood, when rest felt like a foreign language, you kept showing up, you kept shining, and that terrified them. Why do you think they study you so closely? Why do they mimic your ideas, copy your language, mirror your rhythm, but still fall short? Because you're not just talented, you're encoded. What you carry is structure. Without you, the blueprint collapses. Without your presence, what they built starts leaking. You've probably felt the shift, how people change when you simply stand still, how conversations twist when you say nothing, but your energy speaks for you. That's not pride, that's divine infrastructure. Viola Davis knows that warfare. Long before she stood on Oscar stages and became a global icon of resilience, she was a little girl growing up in poverty, often bullied and dismissed. Early in her career, she was told by a casting director, "You're not leading lady material. Too dark, too raw." It was meant to crush her confidence and keep her in the background. But favor rewrote the script. She didn't change herself, she deepened herself. And from those deep wells of pain and truth, she began to shake the very foundations of the industry that tried to erase her. Today, she's the first black actor to achieve the EGOT status, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar and Tony winner. Not because she fit in, but because she refused to. And that casting director quietly retired, forgotten by the very industry they once kept. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. Have you ever noticed how storms rise right before you step into clarity? Have you realized that your coincidences have been confirmations? Even nature reflects this. Think of a fault line under the earth. It looks stable on the surface, but once pressure is applied in just the right spot, it shifts continents. That's you. Your very existence destabilizes what was never meant to stand. So no, you're not just hard to kill. That would be too easy. You are irreplaceable, a divine design that darkness can't decode. Every attempt to take you out only proved that you're necessary. You don't just carry light. You carry the order that holds the structure together. And now, every breath you take, every truth you speak, every step you walk in alignment, it causes systems to shake. Because without you in your rightful place, the plan fails. That's why the attacks come. Not because you're fragile, but because you were born to interrupt what hell hoped would go unnoticed. And you did. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. You thought your breakthrough was just about reclaiming your life, didn't you? About getting back your peace, restoring your voice, finding stillness in the storm. But have you ever paused to ask, what if your healing wasn't only for you? What if your yes to freedom set off a chain reaction in people you'll never meet, in places you've never walked? You were never just being protected, you were being positioned. The moment you whispered, "No more suffering in silence," something ancient cracked open. You didn't just walk away from bondage, you unlocked something in the spiritual realm that had kept others trapped for generations. And here's what most people never realize. Your quiet decision to choose truth over denial, to choose wholeness over performance, It triggered deliverance that echoed far beyond your own story. Just like Esther, who thought she was just surviving palace politics until Mordecai told her plainly, "And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4:14. Your moment of obedience carried weight far beyond your comfort. Someone else's breakthrough was buried in your decision to heal. I want to tell you about Marius, a renowned orchestral conductor in Vienna. For years, he battled with addiction in silence while composing masterpieces that moved nations. No one knew his torment, until one evening mid-performance he stopped the orchestra and confessed in front of thousands, "This music has been my mask, but today I play unmasked." That confession led to thousands coming forward across Europe with their own stories. What was meant to be his breakdown became a wave of truth across an entire artistic community. Why? Because vulnerability is viral. Freedom spreads like fire. What made his rise even more remarkable was who tried to stop it. His predecessor at the Philharmonic, a rigid traditionalist, once told him behind closed doors, "Art is not therapy, Marius. It's discipline, and broken men don't belong in the spotlight." That same man later resigned in scandal when years of concealed abuse within the orchestra were exposed, ironically by the very truth-tellers he once silenced. For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. Mark 4:22. Has it occurred to you that someone somewhere stood up because you didn't stay down? That a young woman gathered the courage to leave an abusive home because she saw your resilience online? That a man decided to forgive his father because your story reminded him that healing was still possible? There's a woman named Talia. She was stuck in a manipulative spiritual community that used scripture as control. For years, she believed her silence was holiness, but one night she stumbled across your story, your post, your words, and something shifted. She walked away the next day. She wrote once in her journal, "It wasn't the preaching that freed me, it was their survival." She was talking about you. Even in nature, this pattern is clear. Think of an avalanche. It starts with one snowflake moving, barely noticeable, but that single shift triggers a cascade across mountains. You were that first movement. Your survival wasn't just survival, it was activation, and it's still echoing. That's why the attacks were never casual. The enemy wasn't just trying to silence you, he was trying to stop the wave. Because darkness doesn't fear a healed individual, it fears what that healing might set off in others. When you healed, someone else felt brave. When you told your truth, someone else questioned their silence. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Revelation 12:11. Every time you speak, spiritual systems feel the tremor. Every time you rise, the ground beneath old lies shifts. You are no longer just a person. You've become a frequency, a blueprint, a living template of what freedom looks like when obedience overrides fear. Why do you think you were preserved so specifically? Not because of ego, not because God needed you to prove your worth, but because your presence would ripple through families, through timelines, through spiritual lineages. Your voice was never meant to echo alone, it was meant to awaken. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to set the oppressed free. Luke 4:18. And now the system is shaking, not because you were loud, but because your freedom multiplied. So when you walk into rooms and people turn, when your peace makes others restless, when your truth brings tears to strangers' eyes, that's not coincidence. That's the ripple effect. That's the result of divine timing. And it's just getting started. You weren't saved to be safe. You were saved to set others free. They didn't just want to harm you. They wanted to rewrite your memory of the harm. You saw the weapon pointed at you, felt the tension in the air, heard the sharpness under their calm tone. And yet they smiled and asked, "Why are you so defensive?" You flinched and they called you fragile. You questioned and they called you dramatic. But what if the pain you felt was never an overreaction, but a spiritual alert system firing at full force? Have you ever wondered why they worked so hard to convince you that what you sensed wasn't real? Why so much effort went into making you distrust your own soul? That wasn't just gaslighting, that was spiritual sabotage, a direct assault on your discernment. They knew if they could corrupt your clarity, they could keep operating freely, unchecked, unexposed. And for a while, it almost worked. You nearly handed them your voice just to keep the peace. You nearly silenced your intuition to fit their version of truth. But then something shifted. Not with fury, not with fanfare, just focus. A moment when the fog lifted and all the confusion unraveled into crystal understanding. That moment was your awakening, and in that quiet knowing, you became untouchable. They didn't expect you to see through them. They expected you to internalize the chaos and label it as your own fault. But you didn't. Like the blind man Jesus healed, who declared in front of his accusers, "One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." John 9:25. He wasn't defending a theory, he was announcing a fact. So are you. What once confused you now stands exposed under the full light of your discernment. Let me tell you about Eloise, a human rights lawyer in Marseille. For years, she worked under a mentor who praised her in public but gaslit her in private, erasing her ideas, stealing her work, then suggesting she wasn't ready. The day she stood up to him, she didn't raise her voice. She submitted proof of the last 5 years' emails to the board, calmly. Within a month, 4 other women came forward. "It wasn't rage that made me dangerous," she said. "It was clarity." Her story became mandatory reading in her university's law department. Has your quiet seeing ever unnerved someone louder than you? Have your observations made people shift uncomfortably, even when you say nothing? You used to doubt your own energy radar. Now you know that shift in tone was a warning. That drain in the room was confirmation. That feeling in your gut, that was never anxiety. That was spiritual sonar. You may know her now as a global pop icon, Billie Eilish, the youngest artist in history to sweep all 4 major Grammy categories in one night. But before the world sang her lyrics, she was just a quiet girl, writing raw, unfiltered songs in her bedroom. Raised in a world that praised perfection and punished emotional honesty, she was told that sadness was weakness and sensitivity was indulgent. But Billie started writing songs in secret, lyrics that held unsettling truths, dressed in haunting melodies. One day, a teacher heard one of her early songs and called it dangerous. That word stuck. Not because Billie was wrong, but because her clarity disturbed what had long been buried. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118, verse 22. Years later, those very songs would become anthems of healing for millions navigating depression, grief, and silence. What she was mocked for became a tool others clung to. Consider the owl, silent, still, almost unnoticeable, yet it sees through darkness with eyes no other predator possesses. That's your gift. Not to destroy, but to reveal. You walk into everything. Now, you no longer dodge the weapon. You name it, you decode it, and better yet, you teach others how to do the same. Your healing became a lens-dot strategy. You are the consequence they never prepared for. Because now, when someone else is being manipulated, your voice shows up in their spirit like a flare. You've become the light they instinctively turn toward. And what they once called paranoia, now it's prophetic insight. What they once dismissed as too emotional, now it's spiritual X-ray vision. They tried to erase your seeing. Now you're equipping others to never go blind again. You're not a whisper of survival anymore. You're a warning shot. You're not avoiding conflict. You are the truth confronting systems. And the game, it's over. Because now, you see, They thought your silence meant weakness, that your quiet meant confusion, that your stillness was surrender. But have you ever considered, what if your silence wasn't submission, but a sacred scan of everything around you? You weren't shut down, you were switched on. While they smiled, you saw the twitch in their eyes. While they offered compliments, you felt the envy hiding in their tone. While they spoke of peace, your spirit caught the tremor of unrest in their energy. You weren't frozen, you were watching. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you were recording the room, the power dynamics, the subtle betrayals, the shifting allegiances. Like Jesus at the Last Supper, who sat among disciples knowing exactly who would betray him, yet said nothing until the time was right. John 13:21-27. That wasn't passivity. That was prophecy in stillness. That's what you were doing, waiting for the appointed moment. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt more exhausted than heard? Have you noticed the ones who only show support when no one else is watching? That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition. Your silence trained you to pick up what others miss. Let me tell you about Cassian, a commercial airline pilot from Brazil. Years ago, he was grounded unfairly for technical errors on a flight. Errors that turned out to be planted to cover for a corporate scandal. Instead of speaking out immediately, he observed, documented, waited. 2 years later, he released a detailed internal report that exposed 5 executives and saved the careers of dozens of innocent staff. When asked why he waited, he simply said, "You don't confront shadows until you learn where the light hits." You did the same. You let them talk. You let them laugh. You let them believe you didn't notice when they looked away at your victories and leaned closer during your failures. But you noticed everything, and you stored it not for revenge, but for revelation. Even in nature this is true. Consider the jaguar camouflaged in stillness, unseen, unbothered, until the exact moment it moves, and by then it's already too late for its prey. Your silence wasn't absence, it was calculation. Every quiet day was a sharpening of sight. Every ignored slight was a thread you were tracing back to its source. I knew a woman named Meghan. Yes, Meghan Markle, former actress turned Duchess of Sussex. To the world, she was seen smiling at royal events, staying quiet, speaking only when asked. But beneath the silence, she was paying attention. She noticed how narratives were twisted, how subtle exclusions became systemic patterns. While headlines painted her as too dramatic or too American, she was quietly gathering what the world didn't want to see: evidence of bias, isolation, and coded disrespect. When she finally spoke, through interviews, through her own words, it shook the palace and the press alike. "I wasn't silent," she might as well have said. "I was gathering evidence. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light." Luke 8:17. Her voice didn't just challenge tradition, it triggered global conversations about race, mental health, and power dynamics in the most guarded of institutions. What they thought was passivity was actually prophetic perception. She wasn't breaking protocol, she was breaking silence. So why do you think they flinch now when you speak? Why do people look away when you walk in the room? Because you've become precise. You speak after you've seen, and your seeing is surgical. They can't twist your words now, because your knowing is layered, measured, clear. And now that you've gathered what you needed, you no longer stay silent. You're not just reacting, you're releasing. What they called cold is your clarity. What they called indifferent is your alignment. What they thought was you being too quiet was really you collecting spiritual data they had no idea was even visible. You walk into a room now, and the atmosphere adjusts itself, because your silence wasn't weakness, it was surveillance. And now that you've stepped into purpose, every liar in the room feels exposed. without you even saying a word. They thought they had you figured out. They assumed you were still the vulnerable version of you, raw, reactive, easily rattled. So they came in fast, loud, reckless. But have you noticed, the louder they moved, the more they revealed. Their confidence wasn't strength. It was camouflage unraveling. Have you ever watched someone's mask fall off without them even knowing it slipped? They didn't just miss the target when they came for you. They exposed the entire blueprint of their intent. Every backhanded compliment, every so-called concern, every sudden silence when you needed support, none of it was random. Their overconfidence became evidence, and you were ready. You didn't just survive, you studied. Like Elisha, surrounded by enemies but unshaken because he saw something they didn't. Don't be afraid, he said. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. 2 Kings 6:16. That wasn't just faith, that was spiritual intelligence. You've been walking in that same frequency, seeing through the fog of attack with a mind elevated above it. I once heard the story of Livia, a historian in Romania, who uncovered decades of academic theft within her university. Instead of confronting it immediately, she began tracking the citations. Quietly, precisely. She found her own research buried under someone else's name in over 20 published journals. Her case, once revealed, caused a global wave of resignations. But it wasn't rage that got her there. It was awareness born from betrayal. You did the same. They underestimated you, and that miscalculation became the very spotlight they never wanted. They thought you were reacting emotionally, but you were observing with divine distance. You were tracing the pauses in conversation, noting who stayed quiet when your name was slandered, feeling who laughed too quickly at your pain. And you remembered. Why do you think you walk into rooms now and discern energy before words are spoken? Why do their explanations sound like confessions before they even finish? You've developed more than survival. You've developed X-ray vision. You know when someone is projecting. You sense when support is really surveillance. You can feel the difference between a mistake and a manipulation. That's not intuition alone. That's spiritual pattern recognition. For the Word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Hebrews 4:12. Even in nature, the hawk doesn't swoop blindly. It circles, observes, waits, and when it strikes, it already knows the weakest point. You didn't retaliate, you recalibrated, and the elevation you gained became the one thing they couldn't prepare for. Let me tell you about Darnell, a tech analyst in Chicago who suspected his startup partners were misusing investor funds. They kept him distracted with charm, dinners, group photos, but he sensed something beneath it. So he waited. He traced paper trails. 3 months later, he presented the receipts in a board meeting. Calmly, precisely. The room went silent. Darnell wasn't loud. He was undeniable. Be as shrewd as serpents and as innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16. That's you now. Undeniable. They thought they could break you with chaos, but you studied the chaos. You learned the storm's language, and now you speak it better than they do. You see the spirit behind the smile. You hear the fear behind the brag. You read what isn't written. You didn't just dodge the bullet. You watched it in slow motion, analyzed its origin, noted the fingerprints, and you walked away, not just alive, but aware. Not for vengeance, but for liberation, for strategy, for purpose. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Hebrews 4:13. Because now you see them. And the game isn't over because you beat them. It's over because they revealed themselves. And once the truth is exposed, there's no going back to illusion. They tried everything. Dark whispers behind closed doors, smiles sharpened like razors, friendly invitations masking deadly intentions. They used charm as bait, and strategy as poison. From slander to sabotage, curses to manipulation, they gathered every tactic known to man and spirit. But have you ever wondered why nothing stuck? Why it all collapsed like shadows fleeing at dawn? Because there was one thing they never had, and never will: favor. Favor can't be copied. It can't be summoned through rituals or strategies. You don't buy it, borrow it, or earn it through performance. You were marked with it. Before you spoke your first word, heaven already whispered over your spirit, "This one is mine." Have you ever felt protected and couldn't explain why? Or sensed doors open that even your effort couldn't justify? Could it be that favor has been guiding you long before you even knew what to call it? That's not luck, that's favor. Like Noah, who found favor in the eyes of the Lord, Genesis 6:8. While an entire generation drowned in their decisions, he floated on faith. The storm wasn't lighter for him, it just couldn't sink him. That's you. The storms hit, the weapons formed, but somehow nothing could hold you down. Let me tell you about Orla, an opera vocalist from Prague. She lost her voice completely days before her most important audition. Doctors found nothing. She prayed, fasted, sat in silence. On the day of the performance, she sang with a clarity and power she never trained for. The judges wept. When asked how, she said simply, "I wasn't meant to win. I was meant to reveal." Her voice returned that day and stayed. That's favor. Not skill, not effort, assignment. And it's the same with you. They thought if they threw enough dirt on your name, no one would look for the truth. They thought if they made you disappear long enough, you'd stay forgotten. But favor doesn't follow human timelines. It overrides protocol. It disobeys darkness. Have you ever asked yourself how you're still standing after everything they threw at you? How the doors kept opening, even when their slander echoed louder than your defense? You've been moved into rooms they tried to lock you out of. You've received insight that training couldn't teach. You've risen from ashes they swore would be your end. Why? Because you weren't just protected, you were preserved. Though they plot evil against you and devise wicked schemes, they cannot succeed. Psalm 21:11. The weapon didn't jam by accident. The smear campaign didn't gain traction by oversight. The sabotage didn't stick because divine interference disrupted their design. I once knew a man named Aidan, a retired military intelligence officer turned wildlife photographer. He once found himself surrounded by a rebel group in a remote African forest. They were convinced he was a spy. He should have been dead. But their leader, upon seeing his camera, froze. "Your father gave me medicine in 1986, he said. "He saved my mother's life." They let him go unharmed. Aidan never knew about that story until that moment. That's what unseen favor looks like. Protection from seeds planted by your lineage, still bearing fruit in places you've never walked. Even in nature, favor is mirrored. Consider the bison, slow and seemingly vulnerable. But during a blizzard, every other animal turns its back to the storm. The bison walks straight into it. It's wired to withstand what others flee from. That's how you've been shaped. The favor on you is not soft. It's structural. It doesn't bend. It covers. You are my hiding place and my shield. I hope in your word. Psalm 119, verse 114. Have you noticed that what broke others only built you? That what drained them seems to pour something deeper into you? They can't manufacture that. They can fake charisma, buy influence, conjure illusion, but they can't fake what you carry. Favor is the oil that doesn't run dry, the light that exposes sabotage, the frequency that can't be jammed, the covenant that speaks when you are silent. That's why they're confused. You were never the most funded, never the most praised, but still, your name keeps rising. Still, the doors open. Still, the weight of glory follows you where credentials never could. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. So the question is no longer, what did they do to stop you? But how did favor silence every attack with such ease? It wasn't your strength alone that made the difference. It was favor, divine, undeserved, and undeniable. Favor made every bullet miss its mark, not because you dodged them, but because they were divinely rerouted. Favor didn't just block their plans. It confused their strategies until their own weapons turned against them. It swallowed their curses whole before they could ever touch you. And favor, it's not something that can be explained or rationalized. It can only be witnessed by those who tried to curse you and now must watch you rise. You wear that favor now like armor, unbothered by their opinions, unbent by their pressure, and undeniable in your presence. This is not arrogance, it's evidence of alignment with something higher. You didn't just survive death, you changed its definition. But have you ever truly sat with that? Have you ever paused and asked yourself, what even is death anymore if I keep resurrecting through things meant to erase me? You didn't just brush past the edge. You lived through deaths that don't come with funerals, but leave you grieving all the same. The death of identity, the one you built just to fit in, to survive, to feel seen. The death of illusions, when the masks fell and you realized not everyone who cheered was clapping for you. The death of dreams that were too small for your becoming. The death of control, when you stopped trying to shape everything and finally surrendered. And through all of it, you didn't just breathe, you transformed. Like Paul, who said, I die daily, 1 Corinthians 15:31. Not because he longed for death, but because each layer of ego that fell away brought him closer to his true assignment. You've walked that same sacred path, and you didn't even need a tombstone to prove it. Your scars are enough. Let me tell you about Mirielle, a sculptor in Florence. She lost her husband, her savings, her ability to walk within 6 months. Grief tried to paralyze her in more ways than one. But one day, in the garden behind her apartment, she picked up clay with trembling hands and started forming broken figures. Bodies fragmented, but not forgotten. Her work is now displayed across Europe under the name After the Fire. When asked what kept her alive, she whispered, I let the old version of me die, so the new one could create. Have you done that too? Let versions of you quietly slip away in the dark while no one noticed. Have you mourned silently while others thought you were just quiet lately? You let the performance die, the people-pleasing, the self-sabotage disguised as humility. You buried the parts of yourself that no longer resonated with your rising frequency. And in doing so, you stepped into a life most people don't even know exists. A life rooted not in survival, but in spirit, in alignment, in truth. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Even nature mirrors your metamorphosis. Consider the snake. It doesn't resist the shedding. It leans into it. The old skin splits open, not because something went wrong, but because something new grew inside. That's you. You shed entire lives without warning, and still you rise clearer, cleaner, more alive than ever. I once knew a man named Elian, a former investment banker who one day walked out of his office and never returned. I died in that office, he told me, but not in body, in spirit. He now lives in a remote village, teaching children to meditate and build solar energy systems. No one understood why. That's because he wasn't explaining resurrection. He was living it. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. John 12:24. So when people look at you now bewildered, have you noticed it's not just your success they can't process? It's your peace, your stillness, your strength with no visible source. That's because they saw you fall. But they never expected you to rise with power. They thought you were in a coffin, but you were in a cocoon. They mourned what they thought was your end, not realizing they were standing at the gate of your rebirth. And now they're forced to witness flowers bloom from the same dirt they once threw to bury you. That's the kind of poetic justice favor brings. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. To most people, death is a finish line. But to you, it's information, it's transition, it's fuel. You don't just walk out of fire anymore, you command it. You don't run from what almost ended you. You transform because of it. Because you didn't just survive death, you redefined it. And now, you're not haunted by what almost killed you. You're powered by it. They thought if they could kill your confidence, they wouldn't need to kill your calling. That was the real tactic. Not a loud war, not open sabotage, just enough doubt whispered into your soul until you turned the blade inward and called it self-awareness. Have you ever felt yourself slowly disappearing, not physically, but spiritually? Have you ever caught your own reflection and wondered, when did I start apologizing for existing? That's what they wanted. Death by hesitation. Disarm you by distrust of yourself. Their weapons were not fists, they were tone shifts, dismissive nods, passive comments that echoed for days, delayed messages, strategically timed silences. Their aim wasn't to make you collapse in public. It was to get you to shrink so small in private that no one would even know what was missing. And for a season, it worked. You questioned your gifts. You second-guessed your timing. You played small in rooms your spirit knew you were meant to lead. You smiled when your soul begged to roar. You stayed quiet to keep their comfort, while you were crumbling under the weight of your own suppression. But like Lazarus, who was wrapped in grave clothes until a single word from Jesus disrupted death itself, come forth. John 11:43. That same divine call stirred inside of you, not from the outside, but from within. Because the truth is, chosen ones don't stay buried, not even when it's their own mind that entombs them. Let me tell you about Dea, a jewelry artisan in Morocco. For years she sold her work in silence, never signing her pieces, never pricing them fully, because her family told her, real artists don't need attention. One day, a client asked, "Why do you act like your gift is invisible?" That question shattered something. Dea began engraving her initials, charging her worth, and taking up space she once avoided. Today, her pieces are worn by ambassadors and poets across continents. My confidence didn't come from applause, she says. It came from knowing my work was born of fire. And you? You've walked through fire too. Not the kind that scorches flesh, but the kind that burns off false labels, old agreements, and hand-me-down lies. You went to war not with others, but with every voice inside you that wasn't truly yours. Have you ever sat in silence and felt something deeper than healing? Something like returning? That's what happened. You didn't just build self-esteem, you resurrected your essence. You met the version of yourself that had been buried under expectations, buried under fear, buried under shame, and you chose them. And that's when everything shifted. You didn't just step back into rooms, you stepped back into power. Your presence started exposing motives. Your clarity started triggering defensiveness. The same people who used to speak over you now fumble for words. And it's not because you're louder, it's because you see them now, completely. You didn't become arrogant, you became aligned. And alignment is magnetic and threatening. Why do you think they glance down when you walk in? Why do they avoid eye contact when you speak with conviction? Because they can no longer manipulate the version of you that knows exactly who you are. Think of uranium. It's silent, invisible, but once split, it becomes unstoppable. That's you now. Not just glowing, you're radioactive. Not dangerous in presence, but undeniable in energy. You don't demand the room. The room recognizes you. I once met Theo, a sound engineer from Cape Town. For years he adjusted everyone else's volume, but never dared turn up his own. Until one night during a live concert, the mic failed, and he stepped in, reciting the missing lyrics from memory. The crowd went silent, then exploded. He never returned to the booth again. Now he headlines. His confidence didn't start with applause. It started the night he realized silence was no longer his assignment. And you? Your confidence isn't rooted in compliments anymore. It's rooted in proof. Proof that you made it. Proof that the rejection redirected you. Proof that calling doesn't need confirmation. It reveals itself in resurrection. They tried to kill your confidence, thinking that would end the story. But confidence in a chosen one doesn't die. It resurrects, louder, stronger. And this time, it doesn't ask for permission. You're not a survivor. That word's too small now. You're a spiritual system update, a complete override to everything hell thought would define you. Survivors escape, yes. But have you ever asked yourself what happens when the one who escapes also rewrites the map? Because that's what you did. You didn't just navigate a storm, you rewired the atmosphere. You adjusted the coordinates for every soul who will walk behind you. You became the change in the weather pattern of spiritual warfare. Have you noticed that the same attacks don't hit the same anymore? That the things that used to derail you now barely scratch your surface? That's not coincidence. That's code rewired. Like the woman with the issue of blood who reached out and touched Jesus' garment. She wasn't supposed to shift anything, but her reach pulled power through time, through tradition, through spiritual protocol. Luke 8:43 to 48. Your reach did the same. Not just for you, but for an entire bloodline. Let me tell you about Mikael, a high school music teacher in Oslo. For years, he struggled with panic attacks triggered by childhood trauma. Every parent-teacher night left him shaking. One year, instead of hiding it, he opened class with a new song he wrote called Still Here. The song caught on. Students across the city began recording their own versions. Anxiety was still present, but it lost its grip. Mikael didn't just cope. He rewrote the atmosphere of fear into a pattern of courage. That's what you've been doing too. You're no longer running the same spiritual operating system. You used to respond from trauma, from patterns of abandonment, from old programming wrapped in childhood pain. But now it's like they're speaking to a version of you that doesn't even exist anymore. Have you felt it? That strange shift when someone tries to provoke you, and it just doesn't land. They're typing in corrupted code, trying to hack a system that's no longer on their server. You've gone offline from manipulation, from shame, from programmed guilt, and gone online with divine protocol. You're not just aligned, you're reformatted. Think of volcanic ash. What looks like destruction to the naked eye actually becomes the most fertile soil. That's what your warfare did. It didn't just pass, it planted something sacred. And now, everything that grows from you feeds those who come after. I once met Adira, a former photojournalist from Tel Aviv. She survived a car bomb during an assignment, lost her vision in one eye, but she returned with a camera she designed herself. Thermal, sensitive to heat, and spiritual light signatures. Her images now reveal emotional residue in war zones. She told me, "Losing my sight was the beginning of my seeing. We walk by faith, not by sight." 2 Corinthians 5:7. That's what evolution looks like when pain upgrades you instead of defining you. Your elevation wasn't public. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with applause or headlines. It happened in the quiet hours, when you chose alignment over approval, when you chose to feel instead of numb, when you said no, even though it cost you community. That's when the new system installed itself. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. So now they can still try the same emotional sabotage, the ghosting, the guilt, the "you've changed" accusations. But have you noticed it feels like static, like it doesn't compute? That's because it doesn't. You've upgraded. You no longer run on fear code. You don't respond to bait. You're not triggered by voices that used to control you. You're not wired to survive anymore. You're wired to lead. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. You didn't just survive, you reprogrammed the battlefield. And now, you walk in a clarity that doesn't just protect you, it transforms the terrain. Every step you take is a signal. Every boundary you set is a firewall. Every prayer you whisper is a system override against everything designed to keep others trapped. You are not a survivor. You are the spiritual software update that broke the loop. And now, chosen one, let's bring this home. When you chose healing over pretending, when you stopped running on outdated spiritual code built from guilt, shame, and approval addiction, you didn't just bounce back. You rewrote the system. You became the firewall. Your discernment became the encryption. Your inner peace became unhackable. You're no longer compatible with the fear-based tactics that once took you out. That's why the lies fall flat now, why their shade never lands, and why you feel untouched even in the middle of spiritual warfare. You didn't just survive the storm, you evolved beyond it. And now, without even raising your voice, you shift rooms. Without announcing yourself, you are still the signal. Your very presence speaks the language of authority. You are no longer just a survivor. You are a spiritual update. The living patch that rewrote the code and broke the system they thought would run forever. So if this message hit your spirit like lightning through silence, don't keep it to yourself. Let it breathe. Tap that like button if this reminded you of who you are. Drop a comment. 777. If you know your resurrection was never about ego, but divine assignment. Share this with someone who's been fighting silent wars and needs a word that affirms their survival. And subscribe. Turn on notifications, because this isn't just content, it's a confirmation. A sacred space. A revival for the misread, the underestimated, and the spiritually reborn. And to those who've supported this space through super thanks, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if all you've done is show up, listen, and receive, your presence is honored. You didn't just survive, family. You're the reason the old system crashed. Stay aligned, stay encoded, stay unshakable, and until we meet again, may divine favor shield you, purpose guide you, and grace cover every step. God bless you.